Every country has places it doesn't put on postcards. You know those towns that look like they belong in a third world country? You might call them the worst towns in the United States. You know, the towns so bad they do things like sell real estate for $1. Literally $1. Not a typo, not a joke. One actual American dollar for an entire property. In the United States, we pretend like those places are temporary, that they're coming back, turning the corner, or just waiting on the right investment. We tell ourselves this because admitting otherwise would mean accepting that part of the richest country on earth has been quietly written off like a town in a third world country. Like somehow America just gave up on these places and nobody wants to say it out loud. These aren't war zones. People aren't dodging bombs or hiding from military conflicts, but daily life looks less like the American dream and more like everyone just gave up. The infrastructure crumbling, the services non-existent, the hope completely drained out of the place. And here's what makes it even more disturbing. These places exist in the same country where billionaires launch private rockets and people pay $8 for coffee. The same country that claims to be the greatest nation on earth. Yet drive through these towns and you'll see conditions you'd expect in countries we send foreign aid to, not the country sending the aid. Let's take a look at 10 towns where the American dream didn't just die. It was buried, forgotten, and left to rot. These are places where you can buy a house for less than a used Honda Civic, and there's a reason nobody's buying. Number 10, Pritchard, Alabama. Pritchard doesn't punch you in the face when you arrive. That's why they rank lower on this list. It eases you in. You assume it's just a struggling edge of mobile, something that will smooth out if you drive long enough, that maybe you just caught it on a bad day or in a rough neighborhood. Then you realize it doesn't smooth out. This is it. This is the whole town. This is a city that collapsed administratively before it collapsed physically, and that's an important distinction. Usually, you see buildings fall apart first, then the government follows. Pritchard went the other way. The government imploded, and the buildings are still catching up. Years of financial mismanagement drained the city to the point where pensions weren't paid and basic services became unreliable. We're not talking about delayed payments or budget constraints. We're talking about complete financial collapse. At one point, Pritchard literally ran out of money to operate the city. Yeah, that's no joke. The city of Pritchard, Alabama, experienced a major pension crisis starting in 2009 when its municipal pension fund ran completely out of money, forcing the suspension of payments to over 150 retirees. These were people who worked their entire careers for the city, police officers, firefighters, municipal workers, and suddenly their checks just stopped. No warning, no plan, just gone. Imagine working 30 years for a city, retiring with a pension, and then one day being told, sorry, we spent all the money. There's nothing left. That's not just financial mismanagement. That's a betrayal that destroys trust in a way that never fully recovers. Once residents stop trusting a city to show up, everything changes. People stop reporting issues because what's the point? Nobody's coming to fix it anyway. They stop waiting for fixes because fixes never arrive. Then they stop believing improvement is coming, and that's when decline becomes permanent. That's when hope dies. Here's the thing about Pritchard that makes it even worse. They filed for municipal bankruptcy more than once. This wasn't a one-time mistake. 10 years prior to the 2009 situation, they had also declared bankruptcy. That's a pattern of failure that goes beyond bad luck. That's systemic dysfunction. Currently, their poverty rate is roughly double the national average. Walk through Pritchard and you'll see what that looks like in real terms. Boarded up storefronts, houses with missing windows, streets with potholes so deep you could lose a tire, sidewalks cracked and crumbling like nobody's walked on them in years. The tax base is so weak that even basic maintenance becomes impossible. Streetlights that burn out stay dark. Trash pickup becomes irregular. Parks turn into overgrown lots. The city can't afford to maintain what it has, let alone improve anything. Now, Pritchard doesn't feel abandoned exactly. It feels unsupported, and there is a difference. Abandoned means everyone left. Unsupported means people are still there, still living their lives, still trying to make it work, but they're doing it without any help from the systems that are supposed to serve them. You've got families raising kids in neighborhoods where the police response time is measured in hours, not minutes, where the fire department is understaffed and underfunded, where the schools are struggling with budgets so tight they can barely afford textbooks, let alone the kind of programs that give kids a real shot at escaping the cycle. This is what it looks like when a city slowly gives up on itself, when the people with money and options leave and everyone else just tries to survive in what's left behind. Number 9, Clarksdale, Mississippi. Clarksdale survives on its reputation, and that reputation almost hurts more than it helps. The blues legacy keeps the town on the map, but it doesn't keep the lights on. This is the home of Muddy Waters, the birthplace of the Delta Blues, a place with genuine cultural significance that should translate into something sustainable. But it doesn't. Tourism comes and goes, mostly on weekends, mostly downtown, where the blues clubs and museums cluster together. Tour buses roll in, people spend a few hours, buy some souvenirs, maybe catch a show, and then they leave. The rest of the city exists on a different economy entirely, one based on poverty, limited opportunities, and dwindling hope. When farming mechanized and manufacturing disappeared, nothing replaced them at that scale. Young people left because there were no jobs, no future, no reason to stay. And those who stayed aged in place. Infrastructure followed the same path, aging without replacement, deteriorating without repair. Clarksdale isn't chaotic. It's tired. Everything works just well enough to avoid emergency status and not well enough to inspire confidence. The water runs, but nobody trusts it completely. The roads are passable, but you wouldn't want to drive them at night when you can't see the potholes coming. The schools stay open, but the test scores tell a story of systems barely functioning. Since 1980, Clarksdale has lost 1/3 of their population. Think about that. 1 out of every 3 people who lived there in 1980 is gone now. In the 1970s, they had over 21,000 residents, and right now they've got just about 14,000. That's not gradual decline. That's hemorrhaging people. And it's not random who leaves. It's the young, the educated, the ambitious. The people with options get out. What's left is an increasingly elderly population with limited resources trying to maintain a city designed for twice as many people. The median household income in the United States is around $55,000. In Clarksdale, it's under $30,000. The rest of Mississippi averages a little over $40,000. So if your average income is $20,000 below the national average, your tax base is weak. There's no other way to put it. When people don't make money, they can't spend money. When they can't spend money, businesses close. When businesses close, people lose jobs. When people lose jobs, they make even less money. It's a death spiral that's almost impossible to reverse without massive outside intervention that never comes. If you look at Clarksdale on area vibes, their health and safety, which means access to hospitals and emergency services and things like that, they're graded an F. Same with schools, employment, commute, and amenities. The only thing they do have that gets an A is cost of living and housing. That's always the case. When everything else sucks, houses are cheap and the cost of living is dirt cheap. But cheap housing isn't a sign of opportunity. It's a sign of nobody wanting to live there. It's a sign that supply massively exceeds demand because people are leaving faster than new people arrive. If you're a photographer trying to make this town look like it's not a third world country for a travel brochure or something like that, you've got your work cut out for you. You can shoot the historic downtown, get the blues club facades, capture the romanticized poverty that tourists find authentic. But step 2 blocks in any direction, and the illusion collapses into the reality of deep, persistent, generational poverty. Number 8, Natchez, Mississippi. Natchez is a magic trick. It shows you one side and hopes you don't turn your head. The riverfront is polished. The antebellum mansions are maintained, preserved like museum pieces. Tourists arrive, walk the scenic routes, take pictures of the beautiful old homes, eat at the nice restaurants downtown, and leave thinking Natchez is this charming southern town with history and character. Step 3 blocks off the scenic route, and that illusion collapses fast. The economy never diversified. After river trade declined, When steamboats stopped being the primary transportation network and railroads bypassed the town and highways sent traffic elsewhere, Natchez never found a replacement industry. Tourism money circulates in a very small loop and rarely reaches most residents. The people who own the historic homes and run the tour companies do fine. Everyone else struggles. That creates a split city where beauty and poverty sit uncomfortably close together, where million-dollar homes overlook neighborhoods that look like they've been forgotten by time. Natchez didn't decline loudly. It preserved the past while letting the present deteriorate. The historic district gets attention and investment. The rest of the city gets neglect. Let me give you an example of how bad it is. The national average for poverty level is 15.1%. Currently in Mississippi, it's 22.3%, which makes sense because Mississippi's always had some poverty problems. It consistently ranks among the poorest states in the nation. But Natchez, 35.6% of their population lives below the poverty line. More than 1 in 3 people are officially poor. The median household income here is $26,000. You cannot raise a family on $26,000 a year. You can barely support yourself. That's poverty wages in a country where the cost of everything keeps going up while incomes stay flat. There is a sharp income inequality by neighborhood in this town. Drive through the historic district and you see wealth, preservation, investment. Drive through the north side and you see abandoned houses, boarded windows, streets that haven't been repaired in decades. And there's limited job growth outside of hospitality. If you're not working in tourism or retail, serving the tourists who come to see the pretty houses, your options are extremely limited. No manufacturing, no tech jobs, no major employers bringing hundreds of jobs, just service work that pays minimum wage without benefits. This is what decline looks like when it's wearing makeup. The surface looks fine if you don't look too close. But underneath, the rot is deep and spreading. Number 7, Marksville, Louisiana. Marksville's biggest enemy is isolation. This isn't a suburb of a major city. This isn't a town on a major highway with traffic passing through. This is out there, surrounded by rural Louisiana, disconnected from the economic opportunities that cluster in bigger cities. When regional hospitals consolidated and employers centralized elsewhere, towns like this lost their lifelines. Healthcare became harder to access, not just specialists, but basic primary care. Jobs disappeared quietly as companies closed local operations and consolidated everything in Baton Rouge or Lafayette. The town never had the size or leverage to recover. When you're small and isolated, you don't have bargaining power. You can't attract major employers. You can't compete with cities that offer better infrastructure and larger labor pools. Once small towns like this lose their anchor institutions, the hospital that employed 200 people, the factory that paid decent wages, the regional office that brought white-collar jobs, everything becomes fragile. One closure feels catastrophic. One delay becomes permanent. The margin for error disappears completely. Marksville doesn't really feel dangerous. It just feels forgotten, like the rest of Louisiana and the rest of America moved on, and nobody bothered to tell Marksville they weren't invited. Now, the problems they face are very limited local health care access. That is a big problem here. They're far away from everything, and they just don't have what they need. If you have a heart attack in Marksville, you better hope you make it to the ambulance and that the ambulance makes it to a hospital in time, because the nearest real emergency care is miles away. They have a high dependence on public assistance. It's like everyone here is on welfare almost. Not because they're lazy or gaming the system, but because the jobs that exist don't pay enough to live on. And there aren't enough of those jobs anyway. There are few employers outside government and retail. The government jobs, city workers, school employees are stable but low paying. Retail is mostly minimum wage. That's it. That's the economy. It's sort of a blueprint for what happens when towns survive but stop mattering. The people are still there. The buildings are still standing. But economically, culturally, politically, Marksville doesn't matter anymore. Nobody's making decisions based on what's good for Marksville. The town just exists in the margins, getting by on scraps. Number 6, Ecorse, Michigan. Ecorse is a lesson in industrial dependency. It also sounds like either an online night school or an OnlyFans competitor. I'm not sure which. Let me know in the comments section below what you think it sounds like. But seriously, steel paid for everything in Ecorse. When steel was booming, this town thrived. Good union jobs, solid wages, pensions, benefits. The tax base was strong. The city had money for infrastructure, for services, for all the things a functional city needs. When steel left, the tax base collapsed fast, so fast the city never adjusted. The jobs vanished almost overnight when the mills closed. The workers left. The tax revenue dried up. But the costs of running a city didn't disappear. The roads still needed maintenance. The water system still needed upkeep. The police and fire departments still needed funding. Environmental contamination layered into the economic decline, making redevelopment expensive and unattractive. The industrial sites that once employed thousands are now brownfields, contaminated land that can't be developed without expensive remediation that nobody wants to pay for. They also claimed bankruptcy in the 80s. Being near Detroit didn't help this place either. It just made the neglect more obvious. You're right next to a major city that's also struggling, so there's no spillover benefit, no regional recovery that lifts all boats, just shared decline. This is another one of those towns in the Rust Belt that got hit hard when everything collapsed. They've been losing population since the 1970 census, with 3 of the last 5 decades losing double digits percentage-wise. In 1970, they had over 15,000 people. Now they're under 10,000. That's a third of the population gone. Now, because of industries that were there and are since gone, they have what are called brownfields. When you have territory or land that can't be developed because of contamination, that really hurts a city's ability to attract new investment, and Ecorse has got a lot of brownfield land. These contaminated sites usually had petroleum products, heavy metals like lead and arsenic, asbestos, PCBs, all the toxic stuff from heavy industry. This really limits what you could put on that land, and not a lot of people want to invest in land like that. It costs millions to clean up properly. Nobody wants to spend that kind of money. Well, Ecorse has their fair share and somebody else's. This town has a lot of boarded up windows, buildings that have been vacant for years, not months, years, and streets and sidewalks that look like the last time they got any attention was during the Reagan administration. Maybe Carter. They do have a small little riverfront area, most of the land that's riverfront for Ecorse, and they have a lot of it because they're right on the Detroit River. It's just most of it is taken up by a train D shipyard facility that just looks toxic as hell. Rusted metal, industrial waste, the kind of place where you wouldn't want your kids playing anywhere near. It's too bad because river access could be an asset if it was developed properly. But instead, it's just more industrial blight. Number 5, Cairo, Georgia. Cairo surprises people. It's really not known to most Americans, unless you're into motocross. This is probably the most famous town for amateur motocross in the United States. So they've got that going for them. But Cairo is a little bit of a strange one. They have a nicer downtown for a downtown that doesn't look like it's doing good. The historic buildings are maintained better than you'd expect. There's clearly some pride in the downtown area, some effort to keep up appearances. So that part doesn't look that bad. When you get into the neighborhoods, you find some third-world-looking homes there, and there's quite a few of them. Not just 1 or 2 rough blocks. Whole neighborhoods that look abandoned by modernity. Now, while I was making this video, I was overcome by guilt. I started editing the pictures and things like that of these rundown homes, and I started thinking, you know what? This is wrong. These people are already in a bad situation, and I'm going to put their house on blast, put it on the internet for thousands of people to see and judge. So in this part, I just want to tell you there is a lot of third-world-looking neighborhoods in and around this town without showing you the specific houses. Just know that they exist, and they're not hard to find if you drive through. Their stats are horrible, too. Their schools get graded an F on multiple education ranking sites. Their health and safety get graded an F. Their poverty rate is almost 25%, and the income per capita is $19,000 a year, while the average person in the United States makes at least $31,000 a year. Cairo is knocking it out of the park with $19,000. That's not a living wage. That's barely survival wages. But in Cairo, you expect Southern modesty, a slower pace, maybe limited opportunity. That's part of the small town South. and always has been. What you don't expect is how deep the poverty runs and how little momentum exists for any kind of improvement or change. Like so many other communities that rely on farming over the years, modernization, automation, mechanization kind of made jobs vanish. What used to require hundreds of workers now requires a few people and a lot of machines. While inflation kept moving, while the cost of everything went up, the town stayed still. Wages didn't rise, opportunities didn't expand. Cairo just stayed frozen in economic stagnation. Healthcare access is thin. The nearest hospital with real capabilities is a drive away. Retail is limited. A few dollar stores, maybe a Walmart, not much else. Young adults leave early and don't come back. They graduate high school and they're gone. Off to Atlanta or Columbus or anywhere that has jobs and a future. Number 4, Jennings, Louisiana. Jennings didn't diversify when it had time. Oil, agriculture, and manufacturing once carried this town. When oil prices were high and the fields were producing, money flowed. When agriculture was still labor-intensive and local mills were still operating, jobs existed. When they declined, when oil became less profitable, when farming mechanized, when manufacturing moved overseas or to Mexico, there were no backup plans. The city put all its eggs in 3 baskets, and then all 3 baskets broke at the same time. Infrastructure costs stayed. The roads still needed maintenance. The water system still needed to function. The schools still needed to operate. But the revenue didn't keep up. The tax base shrank as people left and businesses closed and property values declined. The town shifted into maintenance mode, just enough to function, not enough to improve, just enough to keep the water running and the lights on, but not enough to fix the roads properly or upgrade the schools or attract new businesses. Now, if you watch videos around here or you live in Louisiana, pretty much the whole state is in bad shape when it comes to infrastructure, tax base, and social problems. Louisiana has 3 of the most violent cities in America. The whole state struggles with poverty, corruption, environmental issues, and a tax structure that doesn't generate enough revenue for the services people need. The good news is there's plenty of homes under $100,000 to choose from in this part of Louisiana. In fact, you can get houses for $40,000, $50,000 if you're willing to live in Jennings. Of course, there's a reason they're that cheap. Jennings has a violent crime rate that's almost 200% above the national average. That's not a typo. Triple the national average for violent crime. That means your chances of being a victim of violent crime in Jennings are 3 times higher than the average American city. Almost 24% of the population lives below the poverty line. The good news, if you want to call it that, the income per capita, they're doing better than those saps in Cairo, Georgia. Theirs is $24,000. Still poverty wages, but hey, $5,000 more than Cairo. Now, another problem they have is health care. They don't have the best access in the country. Actually, their access is pretty bad. A lot of that has to do with a shrinking population. The last time Jennings saw population growth was the 1950s. They've been losing people for around 75 years. When you lose population for 75 consecutive years, that's not a blip. That's a death spiral. Hospitals close because there aren't enough patients to justify staying open. Doctors leave because they can't make a living. Pharmacies consolidate. What's left is a healthcare desert where getting basic medical care becomes a challenge. Number 3, Tula, Louisiana. Tula feels structurally overwhelmed. High poverty intersects with weak infrastructure and limited services in a way that creates compounding problems that the city has no capacity to address. When something breaks, there's rarely money to fix it quickly or at all. A water main breaks and takes weeks to repair. A road caves in and stays caved in. A building catches fire and just sits there burned out because nobody has the money to tear it down or rebuild it. Farming and rail once anchored this town. When they faded, decline accelerated. No diversification, no recovery cycle, just slow, steady failure. The kind of decline that happens so gradually nobody notices until one day you look around and realize half the town is gone. This town has an odd amount of abandoned homes. They've been abandoned so long it looks like the earth has taken them back over. Nature reclaiming what humans built. Vines growing through windows, trees growing up through collapsed roofs. The kind of thing you see in post-apocalyptic movies, except this is real life in America in 2026. I watched a couple of videos online about Tula. The people around here are weird and desperate. They've got rural gang members, young guys trying to import big city gang culture into a town of 6,000 people, and they got crazy old dudes that walk around with their rifles and point them at their neighbors and threaten them over property line disputes or perceived disrespect. I'm not surprised a lot of crazy stuff goes on around here. I mean, they've got a poverty rate of 43.7%. That is almost half the population living below the poverty line. When almost half the town is officially poor, desperation sets in. People do desperate things. Their actual income per capita is $15,000. You can't even feed yourself on $15,000 and have a roof over your head in 2026. It's like one or the other. Take your choice, food or shelter. You can't afford both. This is the type of town that makes you lose faith in mankind. We're talking about one of the richest countries on the planet. The United States has more wealth than any nation in history, and we've got towns that look like this statistically and physically. Their violent crime rate isn't terrible compared to some places on this list. It's only 28% above the national average. You know why? Nobody can afford bullets. When you're making $15,000 a year, you can't even afford to be a proper criminal.